Hello, I'm Colleen Johnson, CEO of ProKanban.org, and welcome to our next edition of Kanban for Everyone. I'm joined today by Joshua Kerievsky, who is the founder and CEO of Industrial Logic, the creator of Modern Agile, and the author of a new book, Joy of Agility. Joshua, welcome. What did I miss in there? There's lots more than those things. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I just want to mention that we did not color coordinate on purpose here. This is completely random. No, that was a great introduction. Thank you. I mean, that's awesome.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really excited to have you here today, Joshua, and I'll be talking a little bit about the book Joy of Agility as we do our questions today. But we really want to focus on one core concept in the book, this concept of rapid adaptation. So let's start with that. What is rapid adaptation?
I mean, I think that's the essence of agility, really, is to be able to quickly adapt to unexpected circumstances, or just whatever happens in the world is you're adapting to your competitors, you're adapting to the marketplace, or in a sports environment, you're adapting to what's going on with your opposing team or your competition. So it's really critical to be able to rapidly adapt. And I think those words we're probably almost bored with those words like adaptation but I have to say that I do play some sports, and when I play competitively, the need to adapt rapidly becomes so apparent. Even watching sports, right? You can see teams struggling, and do they adapt? Can they adapt? And it of course applies to the business world, right? It really does. But I think sports makes it so real, especially if you play them, and you realize that if you don't adapt, you will lose, right? That's something that I'm feeling viscerally in playing a lot of competitive tennis lately. Is just wow, the ability to rapidly adapt is critical.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you talk about this a lot in the book too, but it's a core concept of agility, yet I think a lot of the practices we put into place maybe hold us back from that rapid adaptation. Things like planning way out in advance what we hope to deliver, or planning bigger batches, too many features. So you introduce a lot of concepts in the book around making things safe to fail, and you even go so far as saying we have to make it safe to fail, or having an environment where it's safe to fail is required for rapid adaptation. Let's talk a little bit more about that. What do you mean by safe to fail?
Yeah, I mean, if, for example, if you have, let's say, automated tests in your software build, right? You're not that afraid to try something and discover quickly that, okay, it's breaking tests. We just broke something. There's a certain freedom there. Or let's try things in the marketplace safely, right? Let's try some safe experiments and see, do they yield any signals that could point us in the direction of a better way to go, let's say for the product, for the user experience, whatever it is. Experimenting safely, on maybe a small fraction of customers, because a lot of times in our field, you don't know what to build, you don't know what to do, you don't know how to compete, and so you have to put these probes into the marketplace and safely experiment, right? You cannot adapt rapidly if you can't experiment safely. They're totally connected. Have you experienced
maybe quickly, right? Yeah, I mean, maybe
Yeah.
even quickly too, right? So I think there's kind of two parts to that. There's the ability to fail, make it safe to fail. You call it fail smarter too in the book. But then you also talk a little bit about why speed is so important here. And I think that's where that combination of a lot of what we think about from a flow perspective of kind of combining like small batches, right? So we can get things out quickly and learn as quickly as possible. As Pratik says, learn as quickly as possible if we're delivering the right thing or not. And I think that's, I think there's so many practices, unfortunately, in what we do that do hold us back from being able to do that.
Yes.
When we think about, how we can learn quickly from our users, right? I think there's always this concept of trying to understand value, and it's, we're working on a new course right now for product, Kanban for product, and we're talking a lot in the course about value. And we tend to put a lot of emphasis on the front part of the process in trying to predict value or forecast value. But a lot of what you share in the joy of agility is stories of things where I think you said 40% of features never actually get used. So it's like, how can we iterate quickly and experiment quickly to figure out if we're delivering the right things? Can you share a little bit more about your personal experiences with figuring out if you're delivering the right value for your customers?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite stories is the story. I learned this from a woman named Laura Klein, who is an expert in Lean and Lean UX. She worked with Eric Ries, where he invented the Lean startup. She's a brilliant woman, and she talked about feature fakes. She didn't use that exact term. I ended up calling it that myself, but it was the concept that you'd put something in your product that's actually fake, and if users click on it, you observe that, and maybe you know, apologize to them. Hey, this is coming soon. Sorry. Or maybe you give them a little gift because you annoyed them. And it's not something you do all the time, right? If you did this all the time, your users would hate you. They'd be like, I don't know where to click because they're going to be like some fake feature. But I did use it once. I'd come back from a conference and I got really inspired. It was the CEO of Intuit was talking about this feature where people who are doing their taxes would help each other with questions. So these are, you know, customers helping each other, trying to understand some tax arcane thing, whatever. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I want to build that into our e-learning software. We already have a Q&A feature, but that's where students ask instructors questions. How could I get students collaborating on a page when they happen to be on the same page at the same time? And I got excited, but then I said, wait a minute. This might not be such a great idea. So how could we fake it and see if there's interest? And so with a colleague of mine, we just put a quick little, you know, fake feature, and it said, you know, 23 users on this page right now, join the chat. And that led to a data, you know, people, we put that experiment live. It was live for a couple of days. We got some data to see who was interested, who clicked, who was interested in like actually that feature. And the data told us not enough people cared.
Right. So you were able to determine whether or not you wanted to invest in that without investing a lot of money or a lot of time in building a feature that nobody was going to use. I love
And
that.
we decided not to build it. And I could retrospect and go, well, maybe I could have done the experiment slightly differently or tried various variations on the experiment. But ultimately, it was like, you know, this was just like one of those many ideas you might have for a product, and not that compelling. So forget it.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, so when we think a lot about experimentation and customer value, we tend to think about, you know, I've heard, you know, what measures are we going to put in place to measure whether or not the customers like this feature, right? But today I want to really focus in on specifically flow metrics and how we use flow metrics for forecasting and how that can help us with rapid adaptation. But before we go down that path, would you say flow metrics could be considered a customer centric metrics? It's a mouthful.
I think flow metrics definitely are customer centric because they really do give you a better understanding of what you are able to deliver, you know, by some date range. So absolutely, yes, it's having those flow metrics and that level of, you know, predictability is really important to understand, you know, what you can give your customer, and your customer cares about what's coming out. So if you know, don't have accurate data about what you're able to flow out to them, then they might be annoyed with you.
Very, very likely annoyed with you. You're right. Well, when we think about flow metrics and how they can help here, when we were having our conversation before this show, we were talking specifically about probabilistic forecasting, and I think we always tend to think about forecasting being used, like you said, to tell a customer when is something going to be done, or tell a stakeholder when is something going to be done. But you had a really interesting, I guess, lens on this that I don't think we think of very frequently, and that is, how does that forecasting help us when we're trying to think about how to change direction, change scope, to pivot to something new, or decide not to implement something altogether. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you've used that?
Absolutely, yeah. So we recently completed a very large scale rewrite of a global payment company's a point of sale system. So these are the kinds of systems that get used in restaurants around the world, and millions of people use them. They're in many restaurants. So it's complicated software, very complicated software, and it was a 10-year-old product we rewrote. And when you rewrite a 10-year-old product, there's lots of hidden functionality that nobody even remembers, but it can do that. Oh, it can do this. It can split checks in this bizarre way when people are at a table and they want to split checks in a strange way. Lots of choices about what to actually, replicate in the new version versus leaving it in the old version and saying we're not going to make it again. Very complicated, hard project where forecasting was hugely important. This company was basically dealing with customer attrition, so competitors nipping at their toes and basically taking over their customers because they had a newer looking, sexier product. So this thing had to get out into the marketplace quickly, and that meant really looking at hundreds and even thousands of little features and trying to figure out how much can we get done by a certain date, what could we put into the marketplace. And so and there are a lot of gotchas. There's a lot of like, oh, no one knew it was that complicated. This is bigger than we thought. So we were looking at flow metrics and doing probabilistic forecasting throughout the project. And it was absolutely instrumental in changing the plan. So I call it reckoning with reality, which is that these flow metrics and this probabilistic forecasting made reality much clearer. And so with that clarity, you could say, hey, this thing's going to take us another 1.5 years to do if we don't start just changing our plan and changing what we're actually going to ship. Because some of these arcane features were just actually not even important. That's a whole nother discussion. Do you have usage metrics on every feature? And do you know which features are never used? Why rewrite them, right? So a lot of constant looking at flow metrics and probabilistic forecasting, which was very accurate. I mean, getting those date ranges, with a good probabilistic forecast, you can say it's 85% chance you're going to land in this date range, and then it's a 95% chance you're going to land in this date range, and then a 99% chance. And then so management loved that, right? Management of these customers that we worked with, they really liked to see that kind of data, and it helped to constantly adapt the plan.
Yeah, and you said something really specific there, or that I want to go back to, that your forecast helped you figure out how much you could deliver in each of those date ranges. But what we often hear, I think, is, I guess, pushback on the concept of probabilistic forecasting, or the value of predictability being in what we're going to deliver when we're trying to uncover things and learn things and be able to respond to those things. And I think you said that really nicely, because it's not so much that you're saying that these 20 features are the 20 features we have to deliver by that date, but here's how much we can get done in that range. And that can adapt, right, based on the feedback you're getting around what you're deploying or what you're learning of those features that maybe never get touched.
Exactly. Yes.
When you think about the data that you're looking at, whether it's customer usage metrics or flow metrics, are there false signals to watch out for, or things that you see organizations get stuck responding to or adapting to? Maybe like they're responding to the wrong data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great question, and I'm sure you've experienced it, but I've seen it. If you look at the data too early and make decisions based upon that early data, right? Like you haven't accumulated much data yet, right? The team hasn't been working for many months. And so in those early days, I don't trust that data very much. We want to see, several months worth of data before we can start to trust it. But I can say that, I mean, just kind of quickly back to the last subject of adapting quickly, one of the things the data showed us was that we needed to increase the size of our team. And that if we did not increase the size of our team, we could not hit dates that our customer wanted. So it really helped us to adapt to, okay, time to add some people in India and a few people in Europe and a few people in Brazil. And we bulked up the size of our team based upon flow metrics and probabilistic forecasting. So I'm a huge fan of it. I mean, the people that push back, what do they push back on? I'm curious.
I think that there's maybe a misconception sometimes with the concept of predictability. What do we mean by predictability? And I think, it's when I think about how to use those forecasts, it's really about either when or how much can we get by a certain date. If the date is fixed, not so much what it is, right? It's almost creating a budget to say, you have this, you can fit this many things in by this date, or if you have this many things, here's your date range. But what those, let's say it's 20 items that you can get by that date range. Those can change, and they probably should be changing all the time based on that customer feedback that you're getting. So I think a lot of the pushback tends to be around what, not when, and
Mhm.
that being predictable shouldn't be about what we're delivering. And I would agree with that statement, but I think it's maybe some misconceptions around what we mean when we talk about predictability.
Yeah, I get that. I think, like for me, what it brings up a lot of times is, if you want to be predictable, you're going to have to be pretty cutthroat about what you don't do, right? That is, if I want to go fast, I just figure out what not to do, right? Like I could have
Yeah.
a car without heated seats. Oh my God, can you imagine a car without heated seats? It's like, so, right, features that have heated seats and the moonroof, and the features so fat and so plush and exotic. It's like, come on, start with something more basic and ship it. You don't need all those fancy features there. Like you can add them later and you may not need them at all because your customer might have other needs that are way more important. It could be AI is more important than making that feature so like awesome as you think it will be. You have to be humble enough to say, let me just ship basic functionality and then let me learn and adapt what I have, rather than we have this giant plan. It's going to take us way too long, but you're going to have to hurry and rush and work overtime, and that's just in the manifesto. One of the principles is maximizing the amount of work not done. So
Mhm.
if you want to be predictable, maximize the amount of work not done. Figure out what you don't need to do, and that's going to help you tremendously.
I want to go back to something you said too about team size and adding more folks to your teams. And so a lot of times when we think about what to do when scope changes or a date changes, right? Those tend to be the two levers we always look to pull first, right? We move the date or we decrease the scope. But in the book, you talk a lot about team size, and I think challenging maybe the small team sizes that we've always been told we have to keep. That's the 7 plus or minus 2 or 2 pizza team, whatever you want to call it, right? And you talk about challenging team sizes from that perspective, and even tracking some of the handoff times and handoff costs of having those small teams. Can you tell us more about what you learned in using that as a lever you could pull for predictability?
Yeah. So this is not easy stuff because I fundamentally believe that if you work with really, really skilled people, and I'm talking about like in the programming world, we work with these extreme programmers, okay, X-peers. These people are obsessed with, I would say they're obsessed with risk management in software development. That is, they love to manage risks. They love building tests to make sure that the software they're writing is working. They love to simplify the code by refactoring it and making it easy to change. They're obsessed with a lot of awesome practices that are almost like a necklace. And so when we bulk up a team with extreme programmers, we don't experience the typical forces of gravity that you would see in software development, where the team's going to go slower just because you've added a bunch of more people. That is typical. That's very typical. I don't see it with extreme programmers, to be honest. These are, and you're talking about very sophisticated veteran programmers. You bring those people onto a team, you can go even faster. Okay, but that said, when it comes to team size, I do not buy the whole 2 pizza team concept. I think it's wonderful for Amazon, but like any of these models, it worked at Spotify, it worked, yeah.
Right.
It's contextual. It's very specific to what they're doing there. Like, not every company's doing that. And I've had tremendously excellent experiences with large teams. One team at Nielsen Media, the Nielsen ratings people, right? That was 30 people. And I talk about that in the book. And it was, at first we were like, my fellow coaches and I were like, this is big. But little did we know that the foresight of the executive who brought us in, he knew that what we were going to do was going to work, and he wanted to spread it across the whole division. So not only were we were doing more than just building software, we were building people and building those people's skills. So there's more than one reason to have the size of the team be what it needs to be. It's not always, whatever, two pizzas. Slow handoffs are terrible. I can't stand waiting around for another team to do something for me that I want to ship. I want to get stuff out the door. So if there's slow handoffs all the time, I will typically say size your team for few to no slow handoffs. If that means borrowing a few people for a month, right, because you need them just for the month to go faster, great, figure that out, right? But don't just rely on a ecosystem that involves tons of slow handoffs. It's not good for flow. It's not good for customers. And so you can get to too big of a team. We once went to a bank that had an XP team that was 180 people. It was, there was no Ozempic for teams back then, but basically it was way too big. Basically in that particular corporation, managers seemed to make more money if they had more people reporting to them. And so these managers went nuts hiring people. And it got bloated and bloated and bloated. And it should have been about a 25-person team for what they were doing. In fact, we compared their code size to another system we just built in a startup. It was about the same complexity, about the same amount of lines of code, but one team was 180 people and one team was 25. We're like, this is crazy bloated. So I'm not advocating for big teams. I'm advocating for size your teams to have wonderful continuous flow, continuous deployment, continuous value to customers. Size them that way and look for those delays and bottlenecks and get rid of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we see that a lot when I go teach classes for organizations and we start mapping out the definition of the team's workflow and trying to map out all the stages of their workflow. As soon as I start to see like, okay, well now it goes to this team's board, or now that team's board's work goes to this team's board. And it's like, why are you separating all of this by small teams then, when all of the work is really flowing through all of this as one group? But a lot of it, I think, also gets really locked into org chart reporting structure type of dynamics like you described, where it's like, well, we have separate managers, so we can't have our work on the same board. And we become more focused really on who's doing the work and less on how the work moves. And so I see that even if it's not an agile organization, that tends to be where people get stuck.
Yeah, and those handoffs or that kind of org structure, we often find it leads to inferior performance in sense that developers write code. They can't think about a feature. Forget that. They can't do any product development work. They only write code. That's complete nonsense. We were in one corporation where the product owner came up with a really bad idea for a user interface. Okay, and the whole team was like, we could just give them a spreadsheet and they could do all their work on the spreadsheet. We wouldn't have to build any of those screens you've just given us. And the product owner said, nope, I want you to build it this way. And the developer said, we're going to do the spreadsheet as a quick experiment and give it to these customers and see what they say. They loved it. And they had usage metrics to show they loved it. The product owner was pissed off at this team for doing that. But that spreadsheet took very little time to produce and to give that solution to the customer. So I think a big problem with these handoffs that happen, okay, product owners meet with subject matter experts, and then it flows down to this group, and then it's not enough collaboration. It's not enough, using the brains of all the people on the team to actually come up with great ideas for what to build and what not to build. That leads to high performance as well, and I don't see enough of it in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely, and for all the same reasons, right? So it kind of along the same lines of what we're talking about here with team structure, I was excited in the book to see what I felt like was a little bit of a love story back from your team's transition to Kanban. And you talked specifically about moving away from sprints.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that journey went from your teams, and how did that transition away from time boxes help with rapid adaptation for your teams?
Great question. I mean, boy, did it help. So first of all, we used, XP calls them iterations, but they're the same as Scrum sprints, right? Usually a week or 2 weeks long. And we did that for 7 or 8 years at Industrial Logic. Taught that to people, thought it was like absolutely essential to the way we worked, until we started to learn a little bit more about Kanban. There was a birds of a feather gathering at the Agile conference in DC one year, and I happened to attend it, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting, just forgetting the sprints and just, continuously flowing. Let's try it. Let's give it a shot. So we went back and experimented with that. And it was like an immediately successful experiment. We have a lot of failed experiments. This one was immediately successful. It was like HP was one of our clients at the time. They needed a quick change for when their students would register in our e-learning. And we would just we'd meet, we'd discuss what's most important to do. We picked the HP story, we made the change, we shipped it, and we went back and met again. And it was like there was no sprint anymore. There was no iteration. There was no sitting there and planning a whole week's worth of work or a whole 2 weeks worth of work. It was just what's most important. Let's meet, discuss. And again, that's like getting everybody's brain to think about how to approach the work, because I don't believe that one person knows everything. So how should we approach this? What's the most, we call it bargain hunting, right? What's the best bargain we can find here? Build it, ship it, and repeat. And that kind of flow just became natural for us. And then it eventually turned into, that was around 2007 or 8. And that eventually turned into us getting on the continuous deployment bandwagon and, being able to just deploy continuously to production by about 2010, 2011. We've been doing that ever since. It's been fantastic.
Did you meet any resistance from any of your developers on moving to a continuous flow approach?
No, they loved it, but we were at first quite shy to bring this to our customers. And I remember one customer, we went in there and they said, well, why don't you let's start off with one team. You work with them, and if it goes well, we'll spread this across the organization. We're going to give you our best product manager, and she runs a great team, and we're going to work with her and see what happens. So we taught her about iterations or sprints, her and the rest of the team, and a bunch of other practices. And then I came in to just observe how things were going. And she had these charts on the wall showing sprint plans and how they were doing and all this other stuff. And I'm like, how's this working for you? And she looked a little tentative. She's like, yeah, it seems to be working. I was like, no, for real. Is this, do you like this? Is this the way your team enjoys working? And she's like, she looked at me and was silent for about a minute. And then she's like, you want the truth? And I said, yeah, I want the truth. She's like, well, we don't actually do this stuff I put up on the walls. I did this for you. We actually just meet, decide what to do it, and repeat. It was exactly like how we worked. And we don't bother with these sprints or iterations. And I was like, well, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's the continuous flow approach. There's nothing bad. And that taught me that not to be so afraid of, bringing this up with customers. And what we ultimately found, Colleen, was that it's easier than teaching them sprinting and iterating. It's actually easier adoption. It's much easier. They don't have to sit there and sweat bullets about planning just the right amount of work to fit into some time box. Whereas I used to think that was so important. Now I know it really isn't. What's important is learning how to thin slice work, right? How to do something nice and small and valuable and ship it, or at least integrate it. That's the value. Learn how to do that. Learn how to take something big and get it down to something small, get it done, and move on. That's the real value. That's flow. And so it's a game changer, as you know. And I feel so bad that so many people are still wedded to sprints and iterations, which aren't necessarily evil or bad. It's just that there's a better way, and it's much more joyful to be doing flow.
Well, and I think when that example of thinking about how to respond to customers' changing needs or market needs or new priorities coming in, I think that's really where we start to see how important it is to not overcommit and overplan and spend all this time trying to come up with what you're going to work on for 2 weeks, because it can change. We have a simulation for one of our Kanban classes at Pro Kanban where the teams are kind of forced to pull more into the workflow than they really have capacity to work on. And then something comes up in the simulation that's like, okay, now you have an urgent outage, but you can't pull it in because there's no capacity because you've essentially filled up your to-do column or your backlog with 2 weeks worth of work, and now where's this urgent ticket go? So you have work that's half started because you have to pull something else in, right? And so it kind of drives home all those points of how difficult it is to respond to changing things and changing demands when we focus so much on planning work instead of pulling just in time. And I think that's, when we think about how it all kind of comes together with rapid adaptation and responding to that customer feedback quickly, it's like, I don't know how you do that if you're planning and batching work to your teams, right? You're
Yeah.
locking yourself into something when you almost want it to be wrong. I would want it to be, like if you're
Yeah.
trying to respond to feedback, how could you expect to know exactly what the team should be working on?
Absolutely. And then I started to actually interview people quite a bit about like, well, what do you do towards the end of the sprint? What's it like? And they look at me and they're like, oh God, it's like a total scramble. And we just drop all of the good practices we know we should be. We stop testing things. We stop improving the code. We stop doing this, that, and the other thing just to get it done so that they can save face. They can show, hey, I signed up to do this thing and I got it done at the end of the sprint. You don't want to look at it. You don't want to know how the sausage was made. And this is where you start to create some really poor code that leads ultimately to high maintenance costs and difficulty to change it in the future. It's that pressure to deliver by a certain date, right? You can have healthy pressure, but I find that the constant pressure to decide just how much fits into the sprint and then can I get it all done? Do I look bad if I don't? It tends to lead to dysfunctional behaviors, and those go away with flow.
And you talk in the book about slack time. Let's talk about that for a moment too, because from an engineering perspective, I think what some of the pushback I get sometimes from engineering leaders in moving away from a sprint or away from a time box is, well, if we're at capacity, if we're using WIP limits to help create a pull system, and something's blocked, right? So you're going to tell me you want my developers to just sit there with nothing to do? Like that's such a waste of money and a waste of resources. So you talk about Slack in the book. Let's talk about the importance of Slack. What does that mean and why is it valuable?
Yeah, Slack is a great tool that people could communicate with in messages. No, I'm just joking.
Not that Slack.
That's not that Slack. Slack is, so I'll just give you a quick example. I mean, first of all, I think people need to reflect and step back and think about the work rather than just constantly doing the work. You have to be able to reflect on what you're doing if you're going to adapt rapidly. Let me just switch gears for a moment to tennis. So my friend on my team, he won the first set, then he really badly lost the second set. The guy killed him. And then they had a tiebreaker to play. Okay. And so what he did there, between the time he lost the second set and the tiebreaker, he's got a little bit of time sitting on the bench. What did he do? He just sat there and reflected. What am I doing wrong? What do I need to change? How can I adapt to this fellow and how well he's playing? What am I? And he realized, a couple of things. He wasn't moving his feet well enough and he wasn't moving correctly, and he just had to change that and things should come together. So he had a moment of slack. He had a moment of time when he wasn't playing that he could think and reflect on how to improve. And then he went back and he beat the guy in the tiebreak. And because he had successfully adapted. I think it's the same for us in the software field, which is that time is very, very valuable to think about what's going well, what's not going well, how could we get better, what are we, needing to change. If you don't, and Alistair talks about this in the Heart of Agile, that the reflect piece is a big part of being agile. Is you've got to reflect. You've got to spend some time thinking about what's working and what's not working and how can I change it? What experiments can I do?
And you talk about that in the concept of a blameless retrospective, right? And so there's kind of individual reflection, like we're talking about having downtime and slack to think about things, think about what you're going to work on next. What did you learn? But then there's also kind of a group opportunity or a team-based opportunity for improvement. And for most agile teams, we think about that through the concept of retrospectives. And I loved this section on blameless retrospectives because I think as we start to think about folding flow metrics into retrospectives, one of the things I see happen a lot is it's like we pull up a scatter plot and it's like, hey, there's this outlier story and most of our, 85% of our stories are done in 7 days or less, but one of these took like 50 days and it was yours, Joshua. What did you do? What happened here that your story took 50 days? So let's talk a little bit about blameless retrospectives. How have you seen those worked, and how can we have more of that in that space?
Well, I think the ultimately, like, you've got to create a culture where it's okay to fail and just simply learn from failure. You must, that's just essential. If you're not in that kind of environment, then people are just, they become fearful. And when they're fearful, they work slower. So, if you remember, being agile is about being quick and, adaptable and resourceful. That quickness is important. It goes away with fear. So having anything that makes people afraid, if they're afraid of being criticized publicly or, brought to task for something, it's not going to help most of the time. So it's I'm not saying that you never get upset with a team, right? That's not what I'm saying. I was talking to one company where they just said that the blamelessness had led them to like severe mediocrity, because they were like, they could never criticize anything. They could never, so it's not that, right? You do want to improve in your performance. It's just that you're not penalizing people. You're not embarrassing people. You are, but you still are looking at things and saying, yes, we could improve that, right? At eBay, this engineer came in, he was the sixth or seventh day on the job. He noticed some code that he thought was dead code, and a good engineer will get rid of dead code, code that's not being used. So he deleted it, and it got pushed to production, and it took production down. It was needed. It just was kind of strange the way it was needed. It was not so obvious. What happened to this guy? He won an award from Etsy saying, it's called the 3-armed sweater award, where let's say you're knitting a sweater and you accidentally knit a third arm. So he got that.
Such a great name.
It is. And he got that award because it taught Etsy, oh my God, we've created a fragile ecosystem in which a programmer can push some code that is unsafe and goes to production, brings production down. Shame on us. Thank you, developer, for exposing this fragility to us. There's a lot to learn here. And you've taught us something. That's how they treat it there. So then they went and fixed it, right? It's not like they're living with that kind of problem. But at the same time, that developer was not afraid to maybe make a mistake in the future, right? I mean, that's the kind of culture that you really want to create. And it can go too far. Like, if someone does something that really threatens the reputation of the company, or does something, obviously some mistakes can be like catastrophic, but most aren't.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting, right? Everything we're talking about around metrics and forecasting and rapid adaptation, it applies internally as well as externally. So we're talking about it primarily in terms of the products we're delivering and the value we're bringing to customers, getting that feedback from them and folding it in. But you can apply all that same thinking of fast, valuable, fail fast, safe to fail, that we're talking about from a customer perspective to a team and to the team's process. And I think that that's where, exactly what you said. I've been in environments with that same kind of fear, and everything slows way down. Everybody is terrified of doing something wrong, and it breeds not just, I think, slowness out of caution, but it also, like, we start seeing patterns where it's like stuff is getting hidden and we don't want to expose how long things are taking at certain points of the process. And so it drives all these kind of anti-patterns and learning quickly. And it's like, if we can learn as a team, where are our bottlenecks? Where are the wait times where work's getting stuck between teams? The more we're hiding that kind of stuff, the more we're hurting our ability to adapt how we're working too. So I think it applies to products and it applies to teams really beautifully.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I've just been watching, I'm late to the game here, but I've just been watching The Bear on Hulu, which everyone's been raving about. So we finally watched it. And, it's all about, a high performance, like, restaurant, if you will, right? And what shocked me so much, or what I loved so much, was this one particular character. He's not very disciplined. He's not very good about continuous improvement. He's kind of a rogue, and he's just not the greatest person to work with. but he gets to experience a real high performance restaurant that is just top of the top, like, oh, it's got Michelin stars, and it transforms him. It just transforms. He gets to see what it's like to work at that level, where they're just at the top of their game every night, and it changes him. It completely changes him. And I just bring this up because I think a lot of folks, they just think software development is the way software development is. It's how it's been my whole career. This is how we do. We deal with these kinds of problems. They're not even aware of what high performance teams do. And so, if they could get that experience of just living and breathing what an incredibly high performing team does, from product to programming to process to people, wow, that would really help them, learn that there's way more to learn, than what the average software development shop does.
Yep. No, I love that. I love that example. There's so much I think we can learn from the restaurant industry, and I love all those examples, right, of thinking about how things work together, how they focus on flow and delivery to the customer, and the experience overall, right. I've heard you're not the first person who I've heard use references from The Bear as a show to talk a little bit about that learning journey and understanding how those things work together. So check it out. It's a good show too.
Yes.
Well, I want to open it up for viewer comments and questions. So if you have any questions for our guest Joshua, feel free to post them here. And as we're waiting for some questions to come in here, I'd love for you to share a little bit with our audience about where people can find more about your work. I mentioned the Joy of Agility book, and I can't recommend it enough. There's so many great stories like the Etsy one in the book. Some of the stories that you've shared from your own teams as well. Any other places where we can check out more about what you're up to with the teams at Industrial Logic?
Yeah, I mean, you can always go to industriallogic.com. We have a bunch of case studies that we've labored hard on to describe, like, the kind of work we do. And the Joy of Agility has its own website, so that's a place to go as well to learn a little bit more about the book, and you can sample the first chapter if you're interested in that. I wrote that book to basically share my favorite lessons learned and favorite stories of agility. And both in parenting and life and work, it's not all just stories about the software industry. There's stories about entrepreneurs like Richard Branson or Oprah Winfrey, stories about comedians like, Chris Rock, and, tennis players and all kinds of stuff. So it's really focused on agility in general and not just in software. So I'm trying to understand, what does agile really mean? I believe this is the thing that I've found, is that we talk about agile all the time, and I don't think we're even sharing the same definition of the word. So it's like we're talking across purposes to each other because we don't even share a simple agreement on what does this word mean. I use the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of it, which is, this ability to move with quick, easy grace, or being quick, resourceful, and adaptable. Either one will do. And that has simplified my life. It has simplified how I believe I can be more agile in any given circumstance. It's a very clear and precise definition of agility. It's not tied to a manifesto. It's not tied to an industry. It is timeless. And I'm still very passionate about it. And that's what that book's all about, is sharing that passion for agility in general. So I wish more people would read the book. I think it's most people think they know what agile means. So my sales have not been very good, but it's truly my best stories compiled into a book.
Well, and I listened to it on audiobook, so I feel like I've just been spending the last couple of weeks with you because you got to narrate your own audiobook. So it's even really better because it's like you're telling all the stories directly to me.
I was very happy I had to audition to be the author of my own.
Oh, really?
That's
pretty funny.
And I spent 3 days in a little tiny booth in Hollywood, California, doing the recording with an incredible sound engineer. So that was really fun. But awesome. Thanks for listening to it.
Well, I haven't seen any questions coming in, and I guess I'll go ahead and ask one, because I think one of the things that I see coming up a lot in these conversations, especially as we're talking about agile and agility and what it means to organizations, is what's next for agility. So I think there's, depending on who you ask, there's a lot of different understanding or I guess speculation on where the industry is headed next. What do you think is next for agile?
Well, I mean, I think Agile, my view is the long view. Okay. So I see Agile being influential for hundreds of years. So, I really believe that we're in the early days of agility, and that if we keep that in mind, that this is the early days, that it's okay for there to be craziness and talk of death and talk of like it's fine. It's not going, and it's not going to be less important anytime soon. The thing we have to get rid of is the faux agile, the dark agile, the agile that is based upon thinking of agile as a noun. That is to say, well, we do DevOps, they do agile, or we do product ops, and it's like, no, agility applies to all kinds of things. You can be agile with DevOps and product and UX, and I mean, agility is that ability to be, quick, resourceful, and adaptable. To adapt quickly, to be resourceful in terms of your adaptation. So I still think we're in the early days, Colleen. I think we ought to be optimistic and happy that, like, so yeah, if this particular framework is popular today, I guarantee you in 5 years it won't be. And 5 years is actually nothing in the span of time. So
Yeah.
I think just keep your nose to the grindstone and keep trying to connect with customers that can benefit from all your insights. And what your company is doing, pro Kanban, because I believe you're all doing great work in terms of getting flow to happen. Flow is agility. I mean, it's that flow of value. It's quick and easy and graceful when there's flow. That's agility. Right. So tools that support that and create that are amazing, and keep the fight going, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you on that too. And I think a lot of times we think of Agile being a set of practices or a set of methods that we're using to deliver software. Like you said, it's a software only lens instead of a focus on how we deliver customer value to whoever your customer is, right? If you're a marketing team, it's different. If you're a sales team, it might be different. But I think all of this is really about customer value. And we, in a lot of ways, I feel like stopped talking about that because we became so focused on whether or not we were doing the process right. Are you doing are you doing your sprints right? Are you doing safe right? Or whatever the case may be. And it became less about what the process was producing and more about whether or not we were checking all those boxes. So in some ways, I think good things are happening right now. It's kind of holding a mirror up to all of us to say like, hey, wait, why does any of this matter? Right.
Right.
And is it providing any value to the companies that you're working with? So I'm also optimistic and kind of excited about some of the conversations that we're seeing, not just in our community of agile practitioners, but in organizations kind of saying, is this doing what we want it to do? Is it providing the value that we expected? And doing more than just checking the box from a process, that we have implemented new processes. So.
Well, I have a question for you though. So I personally, I'm not using the word agile as much these days. How about you?
I'm not using the word agile that much these days either. And I think, I think it comes with so much baggage. Like you said, it's not about the true definition of agility the way you described it. And I love that you're going back to the dictionary definition of it here. But I think when we think about agile, it really does, for a lot of people, mean, are we doing the process correctly? Yes. And I think that that's unfortunate. And so I tend to steer clear of it too. And it's interesting, I think we're seeing people change their titles on LinkedIn, and we're seeing like all this, pullback from it of people wanting to move away from it. But at the end of the day, that need to deliver value to our customers hasn't changed. And the need to be able to respond to feedback quickly and fold that feedback into how we're working quickly hasn't changed either. And so I don't know if there's a new term for it. I tend to use Kanban and flow. Like you said, flow, all the flow practices we're trying to teach and trying to bring into organizations are to enable agility. But I do think that term comes with a lot of baggage as well. Yeah. So
I think that's part of the answer to the future of agility, is that we may not be using the word as much, but right. the thinking behind it and the tools that we're producing to make it easier to do, it just getting out of the mindset that it's a noun, that it's a process, and more into what enables flow, what enables quick, easy grace, what enables us to be quick, resourceful, and adaptable. Whatever that is, that's agile. We don't have to call it that if that brand has gotten tarnished, but we're still going to be doing it for the foreseeable future.
Yep, totally agree. Yeah. Well, any closing thoughts for us, Joshua? We're in our last couple minutes here before we wrap up. I know Maria looks like she posted a little bit. She posted a link for Industrial Logic as well to the Joy of Agility website. So if you're interested in checking out the book or more about Industrial Logic, you can do that there. Any closing advice for our audience?
I think basically I would just say, stay focused on looking for ways to be more flow based, to look at probabilistic. If you haven't looked at probabilistic forecasting, either find someone who could demo it for you. Just like with the bear, where you get to experience this person got to experience a high performance restaurant. See if you can experience a high performance team that's using probabilistic forecasting and flow metrics and some of the tools that we've been talking about, like Pro Kanban, and look at teams that are using what I would consider to be more modern approaches to agility, and they're not stuck on some of the older approaches like sprints and iterations and things. It's been evolving, and practitioners have gotten better and better at it. And when I say that, I mean even in terms of helping newbies get into this way of working. We've lowered the bar. We've made it easier and easier and easier to become agile without having to struggle so much, right? Those speed bumps and hurdles that were so difficult in the past. Just like computers are getting more streamlined and powerful and slimmer, and the processes go through that approach too. And I think the work you're doing and others in this lean Kanban agile environment are all focused on that. So look for those leaders and look for those books and things that can help get you to a new level. And when I called it the joy of agility, it was very, very deliberate, because I am joyful when I'm able to be agile, when I'm able to adapt rapidly, when I'm able to do something with quick, easy grace. It's joyful. Like the first time I ever deposited a check by taking the photo of it with my mobile phone. It was just like, oh my God, this is incredible. This is so much easier than going to the bank. Those types of experiences are joyful. And I use that as a gyroscope, if you will, meaning it gets me back on track. The gyroscope will get you back on track when you go off course. Joy is one of those gyroscopes, and work ought to be more joyful, and the way you're working is part of that. So how you work is really something to look at closely and say, is this bringing more joy or less joy? Right?
Yeah. Make change joyful, make change easy, right? So that there is joy in adapting.
Yes.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Joshua. We'll be posting this recording to our Kanban for Everyone YouTube channel, and you can find that link at prokanban.org along with all of our past episodes. We hope you check out more, and we will be joined next month on August 16th by Denise Tills, co-author of Product Operations. So check out that interview coming soon. Thanks again, Joshua.
Thank you, Colleen. Thanks so much for having me.